Walking into a room full of billionaires who want you dead is an art form. Camille Arsenault didn't look like a woman who had been bought off with a $10 million silence agreement. In her deep burgundy gown, she looked like she belonged at the head of the table. But as she scanned the Thibodeaux gala, she wasn't looking for friends. She was looking for the exits. 18 months ago, the Thibodeaux family, the most powerful bloodline in Houston, had scrubbed her name from their history. They thought they'd paid her enough to disappear forever, but tonight Camille wasn't there as a guest. She was there to take the one thing billionaires value more than money: their control. She stood at the entrance of the Museum District ballroom for exactly 4 seconds, not because she was nervous, because she had learned a long time ago that the first 4 seconds in any room tell you everything you need to know about it. Who has the power? Who wants it? Who is pretending they don't need it? This room had all three. 400 people in evening wear, not the loud kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, fabric that fell correctly, jewelry old enough to have a history. The Thibodeaux Family Foundation annual gala was exactly what it had always been, a gathering of Houston's black elite dressed up as charity, which didn't make the charity less real, just more layered. Camille smoothed the front of her dress, deep burgundy, floor length, no extra anything, picked up her folder and walked in. She had a job to do. Her name tag read, Camille Arsenault, Director of Development, Grayson Foundation, Atlanta. Taking back her name hadn't just been a choice, it was a tactical retreat. The Thibodeaux lawyers had been surgical. They offered her a settlement that would make most people retire on one condition: she would never use the family name and she would never step foot in a Houston boardroom again. Signing those papers didn't make her feel quiet. It made her feel like a weapon being put back into its sheath. They thought the money was a bribe. Camille knew it was just startup capital for her revenge. Tonight that name was on a lanyard around her neck, in a room full of people who used to know the other one. She made it 12 steps before Nadia Osei appeared at her elbow. Nadia was the executive director of the Grayson Foundation, Ghanaian-American, late 40s, built like a woman who had survived harder rooms than this one, and dressed accordingly. Tonight she had on a dark green gown, and the expression she always wore when she was watching a situation develop. "You good?" Nadia said it low, not looking at her, eyes moving around the room the way they always did. "I'm good," Camille said. "You sure?" "Nadia, I'm just asking." "I know where we're seated, I know what time I speak, I know the room." Camille paused. "I know the room," she said again, differently. Nadia looked at her then. 1 full second of looking, then she nodded. "Okay, bars on the left, board members are at the front table. The Thibodeaux family is," she stopped. "I know where they'll be," Camille said. She did. She had spent 4 years at events exactly like this one, always slightly to the right of the Thibodeaux table, always 3 degrees outside the inner circle, always aware of the exact distance between where she was standing and where she was not quite allowed to be. Tonight she was presenting to this room. Tonight her name was in the program. Tonight she had helped raise the money that was being celebrated in these flowers, this light, this dress. She moved through the room the way she had learned to move through rooms like this, not fast, not slow, meeting eyes when it made sense, nodding when it didn't, reading who was who by how they held their shoulders and how they said hello. She stopped to speak with 2 board members she recognized from previous galas. She accepted a glass of water from a passing tray. She smiled at a woman in a gold dress who looked like she was hopping for an introduction, but didn't quite know how to ask for one, and introduced herself first. She was almost to the board table when she felt it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a touch. It was the particular sensation of being seen by someone who did not expect to see you, a ripple in the air, a weight shift in the room's atmosphere that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with history. She didn't turn right away. That was something she had also learned. The 4-second rule worked in reverse too. Whatever was coming, it would still be there in 4 seconds. She finished her sentence to the board member. She smiled. She turned. Dominic Thibodeaux was standing at the entrance to the ballroom. He was in a charcoal suit, no tie, the kind of effortless that takes years of money to produce. He was 37 now, and it looked good on him, the way that certain men get better looking as they get older and have no idea, which somehow makes it worse. He was looking directly at her. He had gone completely still. Beside him, in a gown the colour of deep water and a strand of pearls that cost more than some people's cars, was Margaret Thibodeaux. She was 63 years old, a retired appellate judge, and the most precise woman Camille had ever met. Margaret didn't miss things. Margaret saw everything before it happened and had already decided what it meant. She followed her son's gaze. The recognition landed on her face like a closed door. Neither of them moved. Camille held Margaret's eyes for one full second. Then she turned back to the board table, pulled out her chair and sat down. She was not going to give either of them the satisfaction of watching her adjust. Under the table, where no one could see, she pressed her fingers flat against her thigh and breathed in slowly through her nose. She had known this moment was possible. She had known it from the minute she saw the beneficiary name on the gala brief 6 weeks ago, Thibodeau's Family Foundation, and sat with that information for one full night before she made her decision. She had known it was possible, and she had decided to come anyway, because she had never once in her life let someone else determine whether she got to be in a room. But knowing something is possible and living inside the moment it becomes real, those are two different things. She picked up her water glass, she set it down, she opened her folder. Then she heard it, her name, from a board member 2 seats away, pulling her into a conversation about the foundation's latest numbers, and she answered, and her voice came out clean and steady, and something in her chest unlocked a fraction of an inch. She was here, she was doing her job. The rest of it, all of it, could wait until she was done. Across the room, Dominic Thibodeaux had still not moved. Let me take you back, because none of what happened that night makes sense without what came before it, and what came before it is not the story most people would expect. It wasn't ugly from the start. That's the thing people never understand about marriages that end badly. They don't start badly. If they started badly, no one would stay. They start with something real. Something that makes the bad parts harder to name when they finally arrive, because by the time you see them clearly, you're already too deep inside the good parts to know how to leave. Camille met Dominic Thibodeaux on a Saturday in October at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Midtown Houston. She was 27. He was 30. He was the kind of handsome that made you pay attention without knowing why, and he had a way of listening to people that made you feel like you were the most interesting thing in the room. Not in a performed way. In the way of someone who was genuinely curious about people and had never lost that. She liked him immediately, but in the Thibodeaux world, liking someone is a liability. Dominic wasn't just a man, he was an asset. And his mother, Margaret, spent every waking hour ensuring that asset wasn't diluted by outsiders like Camille. I should have seen the prenup for what it was, not a legal formality, but a GPS tracker on my soul. He called her 3 days later. He said he'd gotten her number from the birthday girl and hoped that wasn't strange. She said it was a little strange. He laughed and said he'd been sitting with her number for 3 days trying to decide if it was strange and landing on, probably, but he was going to call anyway. She liked that, the honesty in it, the fact that he didn't pretend the call was effortless. They dated for 2 years. Those 2 years were good. She would tell you that plainly, without nostalgia and without apology, because they were, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. He was attentive without being suffocating. He was proud of her in a way that felt genuine. He talked about her work to his friends, the way people talk about things that genuinely excite them, not the way people talk about things they want to seem proud of. He was funny in the dry, quiet way she liked best, where the joke is almost gone by the time you catch it, and catching it makes you feel like you're in on something. She met his family in the 3rd month. That was the first time she felt it, just a flicker, a slight drop in temperature, the way air feels different 2 seconds before it rains. Margaret Thibodeaux shook her hand and smiled and said, "Dominic has told us so much about you," in a way that told Camille nothing except that Margaret had already assessed her and was not yet ready to share the results. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that meeting anyone's mother was uncomfortable. She told herself a lot of things. They got engaged when she was 29. She said yes on a restaurant rooftop with the Houston skyline behind them and meant it from every part of herself that existed at the time. She wore his grandmother's ring, an oval sapphire set in gold, and it was beautiful and heavy, and she loved it. The wedding was at a venue in River Oaks with 240 guests, most of whom she had never met before that day. Margaret had handled most of the planning, which Camille had agreed to because Margaret offered, and because she was in the middle of a major campaign at work, and because she told herself it was a kindness, not a takeover. She told herself a lot of things. They moved into a house in River Oaks that was technically theirs but felt like Margaret's in every room. The furniture was chosen with Margaret's input. The art on the walls came from a gallery Margaret recommended. The cleaning service Margaret had used for years came on Tuesdays. This was all framed as help. This was all offered as generosity. And it was, in a way, Margaret was genuinely trying to set her son up well, genuinely trying to smooth the transition into the life she had built for her family. The problem was that in all of that smoothing, there was no room for Camille's hands. She brought it up to Dominic after 6 months. Carefully, the way you bring up things you're afraid to name, she said she felt like a guest in her own house sometimes. He listened. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he would talk to his mother. She believed him. She kept believing him for 3.5 more years. The conversations happened. She knew they did because sometimes after them there would be a brief easiness, a month where Margaret called less, where Dominic was more present, where the house felt slightly more like somewhere they both lived. And then, slowly, the pressure would return, subtle as a change in weather, and Dominic would slip back into the groove that his family had laid for him long before she arrived. The worst part was never anything loud. There were no screaming fights, no thrown objects, no dramatic confrontations. The worst part was the dinner tables. Houston charity events, foundation board dinners, the kind of gatherings where who sits where and who introduces whom is an entire political language spoken without words. Camille had learned to read it. She had worked hard to learn it, but reading a language and being allowed to speak it are different things. At those dinners, Margaret would introduce Dominic first. Always. And then she would introduce Camille the way you introduce a pleasant addition, and his lovely wife, with her name as an afterthought, with no professional context attached, as though Camille's career at the Beaumont non-profit where she'd built her entire reputation was a hobby, as though it was sweet but not serious. Dominic never corrected it. Not once. Not in any of those rooms, in front of any of those people, did he say, "My wife's name is Camille Arsenault, and she runs one of the most effective development programs in Southeast Texas, and you should know that." He said it at home. He said it to her privately with genuine admiration. He would come home from events and say, "You were the smartest person in that room," and mean it. But private doesn't count. Private is just air, it disappears. What stays is what you say out loud in front of people when it costs you something. Dominic never paid that cost. Not once. And she kept waiting for him to, kept believing the next time would be different, until the night she finally understood that waiting for someone to choose you over and over, in public, in the rooms that matter, that kind of waiting is its own slow disappearance. She didn't see it happening to her. That's the part that still makes her breath catch when she thinks about it. She was disappearing, and she was doing it quietly, and she didn't see it until the night of the Beaumont dinner. The night something went very still inside her and never quite moved again. The Beaumont dinner wasn't really a dinner. It was a quarterly gathering of Houston's legacy families, the Thibodeaux Circle, the other old names, the kind of people who have attended the same events for 30 years and have the seating charts memorized. Camille had been to 7 of them by then. She had her routine. She dressed carefully, arrived composed, smiled at the right moments, made conversation across the table without ever quite being in the inner circle of it. She had stopped fighting that by then. The fighting had cost her something she couldn't name, and so she had quietly, carefully put it down. She was learning to work with what was available. She was learning, or so she told herself, to exist inside this world without needing it to fully see her. The dinner was at the Wortham estate. Long table, low lighting, food that cost more than she made in a week in Beaumont. She was seated next to a woman named Celeste Fontenot, mid-50s, old Houston money, pleasant enough, and across from a man whose name she had already forgotten by the time the second course arrived. Dominic was 2 seats down, between his mother and his father's oldest friend. He was at ease in a way he was only at ease in these rooms, not performed, just settled, like a key slipping into the right lock. She had loved that ease once, in the beginning, had found it beautiful. Now it mostly reminded her of how much distance there was between his ease and her effort. It was during the 3rd course that it happened. The conversation had turned, as it often did at these dinners, to family. Who was doing what? Whose children were where? Margaret, 3 seats away, was speaking. She was always speaking when it mattered, and she said something that Camille almost let pass, the way she had learned to let things pass. "Of course," Margaret said to the table and not to anyone in particular, the way she always said things she meant most precisely. "We've been thinking a great deal about the next generation. What it means to build something that actually lasts. You need the right foundation for that. The right fit. Every element has to be considered." There was a pause, And then Margaret looked briefly, warmly in the direction of Camille and Dominic and said, "It's something Dominic and I have been discussing, how to position things well going forward." Camille didn't move. She was discussed, she had just been discussed in the past tense as a thing being positioned, in a room of 30 people, by her mother-in-law, in front of her husband. She looked at Dominic. He was looking at his plate. Not because he hadn't heard. She knew by the slight tension in his jaw that he had heard every word. He was looking at his plate because looking at his plate was easier than looking at his wife. Because looking at his wife would have required him to do something about what he had just heard, and doing something about it would have cost him a position in this room that he had been born into, and would never, in this lifetime, be willing to give up. Celeste Fontenot said something pleasant to fill the silence. The conversation moved on. Camille picked up her fork. She ate the rest of that dinner. She made conversation. She laughed at one point. She remembered that afterward the laugh, how clean and easy it sounded, how completely it hid the thing that was happening inside her chest. She drove home with Dominic in a silence that he tried twice to break and couldn't, and she let him fail at it, not because she was punishing him, but because she didn't have words yet for what she was feeling. She found them at 2 a.m, sitting at the kitchen island in the dark. Dominic came downstairs and found her there, and he sat across from her and he said, "I know." 2 words, "I know." Not "I'm sorry," not "she had no right," not "I should have said something," just "I know," as though acknowledging the existence of the thing was the same as addressing it. As though knowing and acting were interchangeable, when she had spent 4 years learning that they are the furthest things from each other. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. And in that silence something shifted between them, not violently, not with any drama, but with the particular finality of a door that closes so slowly you almost don't notice it until it's already shut. She said, "I can't keep doing this, Dom." He said, "I know." She said, "That's all you have." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know how to be what you need in this family and also be in this family." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. It was also the sentence that ended their marriage, because once it was out in the air between them, there was nothing left to misunderstand. He had made his choice. He had made it 100 times before this night, and he was making it again right now, here in the dark with no one watching. He chose the family. She understood. She hated that she understood. She wanted to be furious, and she was underneath. But mostly she was exhausted in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has finally put it down and cannot remember what it felt like to walk without the weight. She went back upstairs and opened her laptop. She didn't cry. She downloaded 4 years of digital bank statements. If they were going to treat her like a position to be managed, she was going to start looking at the books. That was the night she found the first discrepancy in the Thibodeaux foundation, the first thread of the sweater she would pull tonight. The divorce was filed 3 weeks later. Margaret had a lawyer ready which told Camille everything she needed to know about how this had been discussed. The settlement was clean. A severance, almost the word stuck in her throat every time she thought of it, being paid out of a marriage like a departing employee. She took it. She was not proud of how practical she was about it. She was not ashamed of it either. She signed her name on a Tuesday morning and walked out of a building in downtown Houston into October air that smelled like rain. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she called her cousin Rochelle in Beaumont. Rochelle picked up on the second ring and said, "Well." Camille said, "It's done." There was a pause, then Rochelle said, "Good," with a firmness that almost made Camille laugh, because it was the same firmness Rochelle had used every time she'd called in the past year, every time Camille had talked around the edges of what she couldn't quite say yet. Rochelle had known before she had. Rochelle always knew. "What are you going to do now?" Rochelle asked. Camille looked up at the Houston sky. Grey, low, the kind of sky that can't make up its mind. "Something different," she said. She had no idea yet how true that would turn out to be. Atlanta did not welcome her. Atlanta did not know she existed. That was the point. She drove up on a Thursday in November with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the name of a former colleague who had mentioned, offhand, 8 months ago, that her organization in Atlanta was looking for development people. Camille had filed that away the way she filed everything, quietly in the back of her mind, where it waited until she needed it. She needed it now. The colleague was a woman named Priya Subramaniam, sharp and straight-talking, who ran donor relations at the Grayson Foundation's Atlanta office. They had overlapped briefly at a conference 2 years ago. Priya remembered her. More importantly, Priya remembered her work. "We have a mid-level development position open," Priya said, on a call the week after the divorce was finalized. "It's not glamorous. A lot of cold calls, a lot of cultivation meetings with donors who have heard every pitch. You'd be rebuilding a pipeline that got neglected." "I'll take it," Camille said. There was a brief pause. "You haven't asked about the salary." "Is it livable?" "It is." "Then I'll take it." She started 3 weeks after she arrived. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment in Decatur, small, with a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a single oak tree that she grew unreasonably attached to over the following months. She bought a coffee maker and a good pan and a desk lamp, and she went to work. The first month was hard in the way of anything unfamiliar. She was rebuilding a donor pipeline that someone had let go cold, which meant calling people who had given before and stopped, which meant getting comfortable with rejection at a rate she hadn't experienced since her earliest days in the nonprofit world. She was also learning a new city. Atlanta's professional landscape was different from Houston's in ways she had anticipated and ways she hadn't. Less old money, more self-made. A different relationship to legacy and lineage, which meant she had to relearn the language. She did. She had always been good at languages, at reading rooms, at understanding what people actually wanted when they said something different. It was a skill she had developed in the Thibodorks world, that particular alertness, that translation instinct, and it turned out, removed from the context that had made it a survival tool, it was extraordinary in development work. She could sit across from a donor who had given $50,000 3 years ago and not since, and within 20 minutes she could tell you exactly why they had stopped, and exactly what it would take to bring them back. Not through manipulation, through listening, through the specific, careful attention of someone who had spent years in rooms where she wasn't fully seen and had therefore developed an unusual capacity to fully see others. Nadia Osai noticed within 60 days. Nadia was the executive director, a position she had held for 11 years, built from a struggling community health fund into one of Atlanta's most respected foundations. She was not the kind of person who said things she didn't mean or noticed things she didn't intend to act on. She called Camille into her office on a Wednesday afternoon, sat across from her, and said, "Tell me how you did the Whitmore account." The Whitmore account was a family foundation that had gone cold 18 months ago after a relationship breakdown with a former Grayson staff member. Camille had gotten them back on a pledge that was 40% higher than their previous giving level. Camille told her. Nadia listened without interrupting, then she said, "Where did you learn to do that?" Camille thought about it honestly. "I spent 4 years in a room where I had to understand the political landscape without being allowed to participate in it," she said. "I got very good at reading what wasn't being said." Nadia looked at her for a moment. "Personal or professional?" "Both." Nadia nodded slowly. "I'm moving you to Major Gifts," she said, "and I'm giving you the Hartwell Corporation account. They've been on the fence about a 7-figure commitment for 2 years. I want you to close it." Camille closed it in 4 months. She was promoted to Senior Director of Development 6 months after that. She was promoted to Director 8 months after that, which put her in charge of a team of 6 and a portfolio that accounted for 60% of the foundation's annual revenue. She did not celebrate either promotion. She acknowledged them, said thank you, and went back to work. Not because she wasn't proud, she was, but because the accomplishment felt less like achievement and more like arrival. Like she had finally reached a place she had always been capable of reaching, but had been standing slightly too far from the door to see clearly. Atlanta gave her the door. It also gave her something else, something harder to name. A version of herself she had not met before, looser in the shoulders, quicker to laugh, more likely to say exactly what she thought in a meeting without first calculating how it would land. She made friends who knew her only as Camille Arsenault, who had no prior version of her to compare against, who took her as she currently was without the overlay of who she had been in someone else's house. She called her mother every Sunday. Her mother was a retired school teacher in Beaumont, Eula Arsenault, 71 years old, and possessing the particular wisdom of a woman who had watched many things go wrong and very few things go right and had made her peace with both. Eula never said "I told you so" about the marriage. She had never approved of it entirely. She had liked Dominic, she said, but she had not liked the world that came with him. had seen in the first Thanksgiving visit how Camille arranged herself differently in that house, smaller and more careful. But she said nothing because her daughter was happy in the ways she could see. After the divorce she said only, "You know you were always too much woman for that room." Camille had laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly right. And it was exactly what she needed to hear, and her mother knew that without being told. She was building something in Atlanta. She could feel it taking shape the way you feel a bone knitting, slowly, without drama, day by day, until one morning you press on it, and the ache is mostly gone. She was not happy yet, not fully, but she was on her way there. And for the first time in a long time, on her way there felt like enough. Then Nadia walked into her office on a Tuesday in September and set a gala brief on her desk. "We've been selected as the primary beneficiary for a Houston Foundation's annual gala," Nadia said. "Big room, good donors, I need you to lead the presentation." Camille picked up the brief. She started reading. She got 3 lines in before her eyes found the name of the foundation. She put the brief down. She looked out her window at the courtyard oak tree, its leaves just beginning to turn. She sat with it for the rest of the day, went home, made dinner she didn't taste, lay in her bed that night and stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in 18 months, the particular gravity of a thing that was not finished. By morning, she had made her decision. She picked up the brief, and she wrote her name on the lead presenter line, and she did not cross it out. The gala had been running for 40 minutes when Margaret found her. Camille was coming back from the restroom, which is to say she was walking through the corridor that connected the ballroom to the venue's east wing, a quiet stretch of marble floor and framed photographs of Houston's civic history. And she was alone for the first time all evening, and her heels were the only sound. Then they weren't. "Camille." Margaret said her name the same way she always had, not unkindly, not warmly, with a precise neutrality that managed somehow to be both at once. Like the name itself was being assessed. Camille stopped. She turned. She did not let the stoppage or the turning look like anything other than a woman who had heard her name and responded to it normally. Margaret was walking toward her at a pace that was unhurried but purposeful. She had a glass of champagne in one hand that she hadn't touched. Her pearls caught the corridor light. She looked, as she always looked, like someone who had already decided the outcome of the conversation before the first word was spoken. "I didn't know you'd be here," Margaret said. "Not until I saw the program." "We were confirmed as beneficiary 6 weeks ago," Camille said. "The details were in the Foundation's communication." A brief pause. "Of course," Margaret smiled. It was the smile that had always made Camille's shoulders tighten, warm enough on the surface to feel genuine, precise enough underneath to remind you exactly whose territory you were standing in. "You've done well for yourself. I heard you moved to Atlanta. You're at a foundation there." "I'm the director of development at the Grayson Foundation," Camille said. "Yes." "Impressive," said with the exact intonation that meant, "Less impressive than you think, but I'll acknowledge it. You always had a real drive. I admired that about you, even when," she paused, tilted her head slightly, "even when things were complicated." Camille said nothing. She had learned, in 4 years of Margaret, that responding to the things between the sentences only gave them more oxygen. Margaret set her champagne glass on the narrow ledge beside a framed photograph of Houston City Hall, 1954. "I want to be direct with you," she said, "because I think you deserve that, and because I've always believed that clarity is a kindness." "Go ahead," Camille said. "Tonight is a significant event for this family. The foundation carries my husband's name. What happens in that room matters, to our legacy, to our relationships with donors, to Dominic." She let that sit for a half-second. "I think you understand that having a certain history visible in that room could create complications. For everyone." Camille held very still. "I'm not asking you to leave," Margaret said quickly, as though the idea of asking was beneath her. "I'm asking you to consider whether, given everything, there might be a graceful way to let someone from your team take the lead tonight. Quietly, without disruption. We could make it work. I could speak to Nadia." "You will not speak to Nadia," Camille said. She said it the same way you close a window, not with force, just with finality. Margaret blinked, one small, calibrated blink that was the closest she ever came to surprise. "I've worked on this gala for 3 months, Margaret," Camille said. Her voice wasn't shaking, it was ice. "I know every donor in that room. I also know that 3 of your primary board members have been funneling Grayson Foundation grants back into Thibodeau's own shell companies. Margaret's hand tightened on her champagne glass until her knuckles turned as white as her pearls. You have no proof of that. I don't need proof to start an audit, Margaret. I just need to give my speech. So here's how this goes. You are going to walk back into that room, sit at table 1, and you are going to lead the standing ovation when I'm finished. Camille leaned in, her breath grazing Margaret's ear. You spent 4 years teaching me how to read a room, Margaret. You should have taught me how to be afraid of one, because right now, I own this one. Camille didn't wait for a response. She turned, the silk of her dress snapping like a whip, and walked toward the stage. She could feel Margaret's eyes burning into her back, a billionaire's fury meeting a woman who had nothing left to lose. The announcer's voice boomed, "Please welcome Camille Arsenault." As Camille stepped into the spotlight, she didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at table 1. She looked at Dominic, who was finally, for the first time in his life, terrified of what his wife was about to say. The introduction was brief. That was her preference, she had told the MC. 1 sentence, my name, my title, let me do the rest. She had learned that the longer an introduction, the smaller the speaker looks by the time they arrive at the microphone. She did not want to look small tonight. She walked to the podium, and the room did what rooms do, settled into expectation, the particular hush of 400 people deciding together to be quiet. She looked out at them for 1 full second before she said anything. She saw Nadia at the board table, hands folded, watching with the expression of a woman who was already certain of the outcome. She saw the Thibodeau's table, Margaret composed, back straight, champagne untouched. And Dominic, who was looking at her the way he had been looking at her all evening, with something she recognized and could not entirely name, something between recognition and grief. She looked away from him, not unkindly, just the way you turn from a window when the light has changed. She spoke for 6 minutes. She knew it was 6 minutes after because Nadia told her. In the moment it felt like no time at all, like slipping into water you know the temperature of. She talked about the families the Grayson Foundation served. Not in the abstract, she never spoke about people in the abstract, had always found it a small dishonesty, reducing real lives to categories for the comfort of donors. She talked about specific situations, specific moments, the kind of granular detail that makes people in evening, where suddenly remember that the world outside these walls is different and proximate and real. She talked about a woman in Cobb County who had come to the foundation after her husband left and taken everything legally available to him, which was most of it, which left her with 2 children and a car, and the particular kind of survival mode that doesn't leave room for anything except the next hour. The foundation had helped her stabilize, then retrain, then build. She now ran a small bookkeeping business, and her oldest daughter had just gotten into Georgia Tech. Camille did not tell this story with sentimentality. She told it the way the woman had told it to her, matter of fact, clear-eyed, with the specific pride of someone who has done something hard and knows exactly how hard it was. The room was with her. She could feel it, that particular quality of collective attention, 400 people breathing at the same rate, nobody checking their phone, nobody reaching for their wine. She talked about what it means to build something that holds people up, not as a slogan. As a structural question, what does a foundation actually need to do to hold? What are the load-bearing parts? What fails first when the stress gets real? She talked about the foundation's model. The specific ways it distributed support, the gaps it was trying to close, the things it had gotten wrong and corrected and gotten wrong again. She was not performing. That was the thing about Camille at a podium, she never performed. She just said what was true as precisely as she could, in language that didn't require a dictionary, with her full attention on the room in front of her. It was, Nadia had once told her, the rarest possible thing in a world full of people who had perfected the appearance of authenticity. Camille had actual authenticity, which looked completely different and was impossible to fake. She got to the end. She thanked the Thibodeau's family foundation. She said it without hesitation, without an extra beat of silence, just the clean acknowledgement of a professional recognizing a partner. And she said what she always said at the end of these things, which was not a call to donate but a description of what happens when they do. What changes? What becomes possible? She did not beg and she did not sell. She just told the truth about stakes, which was more effective than either. She stepped back from the microphone. The room came back to itself. The applause was immediate and real, not the polite applause of an audience doing its duty, but the kind that starts before people have quite decided to do it, the kind that comes from somewhere involuntary. She walked back to the board table. Nadia leaned over and said very quietly, 6 minutes, I timed it. Good, Camille said. You want to know something, Nadia said. What? 3 board members just asked me about you. Not about the foundation, about you, who you are, what your background is, where you came from. Nadia paused. I told them you were from Beaumont, Texas, and that you went to Rice on a full scholarship, and that you were the best development director I had ever worked with, and one of them said she should be running something. Camille was quiet for a moment. What did you say? She asked. Nadia smiled. I said she already is. She let that sit. Then she picked up her water glass and looked across the room and let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of the evening. The hallway and Margaret, the 4 seconds at the entrance, the years of River Oaks and the dinners and the silences, the Tuesday morning with the lawyer, the drive to Atlanta, the oak tree outside her window, the Hartwell Corporation meeting, the 6 months alone in a 1-bedroom apartment rebuilding something she hadn't fully realized needed rebuilding. She let herself feel it. Then she set it down. Because across the room she could see Dominic getting to his feet. He said something to the person beside him. He straightened his jacket. He moved toward the edge of the room, not toward her, not yet, but with the body language of a man working up to something. She had known he would come to her before the night was over. She had known it from the moment she saw his face at the entrance. What she did not yet know was what she would say when he did. She thought about it now, in the 20 or 30 minutes she had left before it happened. She didn't arrive at a speech. She didn't arrive at anything prepared. She decided instead to just tell the truth, as precisely as she could, in language that didn't require a dictionary, with her full attention on the person in front of her. The same way she always spoke. The only way she knew how to be. It took him 40 minutes. She knew because she kept half an eye on the room while she worked the post-speech reception, the conversations with donors, the handshakes, the business cards, the careful cultivation that doesn't stop just because the formal program is over. She knew how to do this part with most of her brain, while another part stayed alert, the way you stay alert to a sound you're waiting for even when you're doing something else entirely. He came to her near the coat check, which was as far from the Thibodeaux's table as you could get while still being in the venue. She noted that. He had chosen the edge of the room, the place with the least audience. She said goodbye to the donor she was speaking with and turned to face him. He looked up close, more tired than she had expected. Not old, Dominic would probably never look truly old. He had that kind of face, but tired in the specific way of someone who has been working very hard at something that is not working. There were marks of it around his eyes, a weight in his shoulders that had not been there 4 years ago. She felt the pull of that, the old instinct to ask, to reach, to want to fix the thing she could see was wrong. She noted the pull. She let it pass. Camille, he said. Dominic. A silence. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her all night, with that complicated thing she still couldn't fully name. Up close it resolved itself slightly. It was grief, she decided. Not for the marriage, or not only for the marriage, for something simpler and harder than that. For the version of himself that had made a particular series of choices and had to live inside their consequences. You were extraordinary tonight, he said. She didn't deflect it, thank you. I don't just mean the speech, he paused. I mean all of it, the way you walked in, the way you handled, he stopped. My mother came to find you. She did. What did she say? Does it matter? He looked at her. No, he said after a moment. I suppose it doesn't. Another silence. She waited. She had learned patience, real patience, not the performed kind, not the strategic kind, but the patience of someone who has stopped needing things to happen on a particular timeline. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since I walked in tonight, he said. I had things I thought I wanted to say. They all sounded wrong once I was actually standing here. Say the true one, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry I never said your name right. She was very still. I don't mean your actual name, I mean, he looked down briefly, then back up. In those rooms, the dinners, I never introduced you the way you deserved to be introduced. I let my mother set the terms and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself you understood. I told myself a lot of things. He paused. I was a coward, that's the true one. She took that in. She didn't rush past it or minimize it or offer him comfort for saying it. He had finally said the real thing, and it deserved to sit in the air between them for a moment without being immediately resolved. "I know," she said. "I know you know. Then why are you saying it now?" He was quiet for a moment, because you deserved to hear it and because he started again. "Because watching you tonight I kept thinking about who you were when I met you. You were always this, you were always exactly this person, and I let my family convince me, or I convinced myself, that there was something missing. Something not quite right, and there was nothing missing, there was never anything missing. It was me. I was the one who wasn't quite right." The honesty of it was almost startling. This was not the Dominic of the dinner tables, the Dominic of the careful silences, the Dominic who chose the path of least family resistance at every turn. This was something else, someone who had spent 18 months sitting with the consequences of a choice and had finally arrived at the truth of it. It was too late. That was the strange, sad, simple fact of the moment. It was too late, and they both knew it, and there was no bitterness in that knowing. Just the particular sadness of things that cannot be undone. "I hope you find a way to be the man in your own life," she said. "Not the man in your family's life, yours." She said it gently, the way you say something you mean completely and are not saying to wound. "You'll be better for it." He nodded. Once, she could see it cost him something. "Are you?" He stopped. "Are you good in Atlanta, is it?" "I'm good," she said, and then, because it was true, "I'm really good, Dom." Something crossed his face when she said it, something she didn't want to study too carefully. She looked away just briefly, and when she looked back he had collected himself. "Good," he said, "that's good." "Take care of yourself," she said. She touched his arm. Once, lightly, the way you touch something you used to hold when you're saying goodbye to the last of it. Then she turned and walked back across the ballroom toward Nadia, who was at the board table with her coat already over her arm and the expression of someone who was ready to leave 20 minutes ago. She did not look back. She had said what was true. She had not used the moment to wound or to reclaim or to prove. She had just spoken as clearly as she could. And now it was finished. That particular chapter of her life closed not with a door slamming but with a quiet, final click. She was lighter, walking away. She hadn't expected that. She had thought she was already at the end of the wait. She discovered she was carrying just a little more than she'd known, a small last thing, a remainder, a held breath, and that it had just now released. "Ready," Nadia said when she reached the table. "Ready," Camille said. They took Nadia's car. Nadia drove, she always drove, had a particular distrust of other people's navigation that she had never fully explained. And they pulled out of the museum district into Houston's nighttime, the city spreading its light in every direction the way Houston does, sprawling and bright and too large to fully hold in one glance. For the first several minutes, neither of them spoke. Camille watched the city move past the window. Office buildings, then smaller streets, then the overpass with its humming columns of traffic. She had lived here for 4 years and she had never fully made peace with Houston. It was too spread out, too car-dependent, too much of a city that had grown horizontally instead of up, covering ground rather than building height. Atlanta suited her more. Atlanta had the kind of density that felt like company. But tonight Houston felt different, smaller somehow, more manageable. "How are you feeling?" Nadia said. She didn't look away from the road when she said it. Camille thought about the question seriously, the way Nadia's questions always demanded to be thought about seriously. "Lighter," she said. "Good lighter or tired lighter?" "Both." Nadia nodded. The speech was good. "You already told me." "I'm telling you again because it was good in a way that's worth telling twice." She paused. "You didn't perform tonight, you never do, but tonight especially. There was something in the room when you spoke that I don't often feel, like everyone agreed for 6 minutes, to be honest." Camille looked at her. "You felt that?" The whole table felt it. Nadia changed lanes, smooth and without ceremony. "The Whitmore heir, you know who I mean, the younger one who barely speaks at these things. He had tears in his eyes during your story about the woman from Cobb County. I watched it happen. He thought no one was looking." Camille was quiet for a moment. She thought about the woman from Cobb County whose name was Priscilla, who had told her story sitting in Camille's office last spring with her hands flat on the desk, the way people put their hands flat on surfaces when they're trying to stay grounded. Priscilla had said, "You can use it if it helps." Camille had said, "Are you sure?" Priscilla had said, "If it helps somebody else not have the same year I had, yes, use it, use all of it." She said I could, Camille said, half to herself. "I know," Nadia said. "I know you wouldn't use it if she hadn't." She glanced over. The man by the coat check, the one in the charcoal suit. Camille looked at her. I saw, Nadia said simply. I know you saw. I also saw the woman who went after you in the corridor, earlier in the evening. Margaret. I know who she is. Nadia said it without heat, just fact. I knew when I saw the foundation name on the beneficiary brief. I had a feeling you might know the family. She paused. You didn't tell me. No. Why? Camille thought about it. Because if I had told you, you would have offered to send someone else, and I didn't want someone else to go. This was my work, my event, my presentation. She paused. And because I needed to know I could walk into that room and do the job without it being about anything other than the job. And could you? Yes. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then, what did the woman say to you in the corridor? She asked me to step back, gracefully. Let someone from the team take the lead tonight. She framed it as a kindness. Of course she did. She was going to approach you about it. Nadia laughed short and sharp. I would like to have seen that. I told her she wouldn't be doing that. Good. Nadia turned onto the highway. The city's lights multiplied around them. And the man, the one by the coat check. My ex-husband. There it was, said plainly into the car, where it immediately became smaller than it had felt inside the building. Camille noticed that how much of what we carry is reduced by simply namming it out loud, in ordinary language, in a normal car with the heat on. He apologized, she said. For real, I think, not the kind of apology that's really just asking for something. What did you say? That I hoped he found a way to be in his own life, that he'd be better for it. Nadia was quiet for a long time, long enough that they had passed 2 exits before she spoke again. You know what I've noticed about you, she said, in the 2 years since I hired you. What? You never ask to be seen. You just do the work and the seeing happens on its own. She glanced over again. Most people can't do that. Most people are so busy making sure they're being looked at that they forget to actually be worth looking at. Camille didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. She just held it. They drove the rest of the way to the hotel in a comfortable silence. When Nadia pulled up, Camille got out and was about to close the car door when Nadia said, The board members who asked about you tonight, I wasn't finished telling you about that. Camille leaned back into the open door. What else? One of them sits on the selection committee for the Whitmore Family Trust Executive Director search. Nadia held her gaze. I'm telling you this not as your boss. I'm telling you this as someone who thinks you're about to walk through a door that's been waiting for you for a while. Camille stood up slowly. She looked at Nadia through the open car window. Go get some sleep, Nadia said. We have a morning flight. She pulled away. Camille stood outside the hotel for a moment, the warm Houston air on her face, the sound of the city behind her. A door that had been waiting for her for a while. She went inside. She called her mother from the hotel room at 10:45 that night, sitting on the edge of the bed with her heels off and her dress still on, because her mother always knew when she was calling with something real rather than just to check in, and she wanted to have this conversation while the evening was still in her body. Eula Arsenault picked up on the second ring. She was 71 years old and never went to sleep before midnight. Camille had inherited that, the late-night wakefulness, the way the last part of the day is when things finally make sense. You're in Houston, Eula said, not a question. Yes. How was it? Camille lay back on the bed and looked at the hotel ceiling. White plaster, a small water stain in the corner shaped vaguely like a boot. I saw Dominic. A pause and Margaret. And Margaret. How'd that go? She asked me to step aside, not loudly. Gracefully, she called it. Eula made a sound, a short, soft sound, not quite a laugh and not quite disgust, somewhere in between. Gracefully. That woman has never done a graceful thing in her life. Everything she does is calculated. I know. What did you say? I said no. Another pause, longer this time. Then Eula said, good, and then, and my son-in-law, what did he want? He's not your son-in-law anymore, Mama. He was for 4 years, that doesn't just disappear. What did he want? He apologized. He said he was a coward. He said it plainly, without making me respond to it in any particular way. Do you believe him? Camille thought about it. Yes. Then that's something, Eula said, not enough but something. I know it's not enough. And you know it's not your job to make it enough. So I know. Because that's what I used to worry about with you, Eula said. Not that you couldn't handle the hard things. You could always handle the hard things. I used to worry that you'd take other people's unfinished business and treat it like your own problem to solve. Like if you were just patient enough and generous enough and gracious enough, eventually people would rise to meet you. Camille was quiet. And sometimes they do, her mother said. Dominic apologized, that's him rising finally. But that doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't obligate you to anything. I know, Camille said, and then, I told him I hoped he found a way to be in his own life, I meant it. I believe you meant it, Eula paused. How did you feel when you said it? Free, Camille said. The word came out before she had fully thought it, but it was right. I felt free. Her mother didn't say anything for a moment. The line was quiet, that particular phone quiet of someone who is with you, fully with you, just not speaking. Tell me about the speech, Eula said. So Camille told her. She told her about the dahlias and about Nadia, and about the 6 minutes at the microphone, and about Priscilla from Cobb County, and the way the room had gotten quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something true is happening in them. She told her about the Whitmore air with the tears he thought no one could see. She told her about what Nadia had said in the car, about the board members, about the selection committee for the executive director search. Eula listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. She was a woman who had spent 40 years in a classroom and had learned the difference between silence that was waiting to speak and silence that was actually listening. Hers was always the second kind. When Camille finished, Eula was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what your grandmother used to say." "Which one?" "Mine, your great-grandmother Odette." Eula's voice changed slightly when she said that name, the way voices change for the people who shaped us before we were old enough to know they were shaping us. She used to say, "The room that's yours will always call you back. You can leave it, you can be pushed out of it, but if it's really yours, it will call you back. Not to where you were, to where you should have been the whole time." Camille stared at the ceiling, the boot-shaped water stain. "That's what tonight was," her mother said. "That room called you back. Not the Houston room, not the Thibodeaux's room. The room of your own worth. And you walked in and you sat down and you showed them, all of them, including yourself, that you knew exactly where you belonged." Something happened in Camille's chest when her mother said that. Something that had been compressed for a very long time released, quietly and completely, like a breath held so long you forget you're holding it until it's gone. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in the lawyer's office, hadn't cried on the drive to Atlanta, hadn't cried through any of the hard months that followed. But she felt, lying on the hotel bed in Houston with her mother's voice in her ear, the nearest she had come to it in a long time. "I'm proud of you," Eula said. "I know you don't need me to say it, but I'm saying it anyway." "I know, Mammoth. Get some sleep, you have a morning flight." That's what Nadia said. "Smart woman, your Nadia." "She is. I want to meet her sometime. I'll make that happen. Good night, baby." "Good night, Mama." She hung up and lay in the dark for a while, the city light coming through the gap in the curtains in a thin strip across the floor. Houston outside the window, all that horizontal sprawl, all those lives running parallel to each other in the dark. She thought about what her mother had said, the room of your own worth. She thought about tomorrow. The morning flight back to Atlanta, the oak tree in the courtyard, the work that would be on her desk when she got in, the Whitmore Trust Selection Committee that Nadia had mentioned with the particular precision of someone dropping a hint that is actually an instruction. She thought about what it meant to be ready for something. Whether readiness was a state you arrived at or something you discovered you already had by the act of stepping forward anyway. She thought about Dominic, standing by the coat check, saying, "I was a coward." She thought about Margaret in the corridor, calculating and recalculating. She thought about 4 years in River Oaks, and the Beaumont dinner, and the kitchen island at 2 in the morning, and a Tuesday morning in a lawyer's office with carpet that smelled like old paper. She thought about the drive to Atlanta, the oak tree, Priya's voice on the phone saying, "Are you sure you haven't asked about the salary?" Nadia's eyes in that first meeting, the Hartwell Corporation, 6 months of hard rebuilding, the particular morning she had woken up and realized she was not surviving anymore, she was living. She closed her eyes. She slept. The flight back to Atlanta was early 6:15, which meant a 4:45 wake-up, which meant she slept 6 hours and woke up more rested than she had expected. There was something about deep sleep that came from things being finished. The body knows when you've set something down. Nadia met her at the gate. She had 2 coffees and the expression of someone who had also slept well and was not going to make a thing of it. They didn't talk much on the flight. Nadia read a report. Camille looked out the window at Texas giving way to Louisiana, giving way to the slow green of the deep south, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was its own luxury. The ability to let the mind go quiet without it filling immediately with the things she was trying not to think about. There were no things she was trying not to think about. That was new. She thought about the Whitmore Trust instead. She had looked it up at 5 in the morning, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed with her phone brightness turned low. It was a significant organization, a family foundation with a 40-year history in workforce development and education access, operating in 6 states, with a budget that was 3 times the Grayson Foundation's. The executive director position was not a lateral move. It was not even a clear step up. It was a different altitude entirely. She did not know if she was ready. She had decided, somewhere around 5:30 in the morning, that not knowing was not the same as not being. She had not known she was ready to move to Atlanta, and she had been. She had not known she was ready to take the Hartwell Corporation account, and she had closed it in 4 months. She had not known she was ready to walk into a room full of Houston's black elite and command it from a podium. And she had done it for 6 minutes, and the room had gone quiet in the best way. She filled out the inquiry form on the Whitmore Trust website at 5:50 in the morning. When they landed in Atlanta, she had a response in her inbox. It was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. The Atlanta air when she came out of the terminal was cool and clean and smelled like the very beginning of fall, that specific smell of leaves releasing their grip, things letting go before the new growth comes. She stood in it for a moment, bag over her shoulder, city ahead of her. She called Rochelle on the way to the parking deck. Rochelle picked up on the first ring. "Well," she said, which was always the first thing Rochelle said and always managed to be exactly the right question. "Well," Camille said, "I saw both of them. And it went the way it needed to go." Define needed. "She tried to push me out of the room. I stayed. He apologized for real. I accepted it. I gave a speech that I think was good. I got on a plane. I'm in Atlanta." A pause, then Rochelle said, "That's it. That's it." No drama, nobody said anything wild, nobody threw a drink. "Nobody threw a drink, Rochelle. I'm a little disappointed." "I know you are." Rochelle laughed, that full, unself-conscious laugh she had always had, the laugh that could fill a room, the laugh that had pulled Camille back from the edge of her worst moments more times than she could count. "Okay," Rochelle said. "Okay, so you went in, you did the thing, you came back. Are you good?" "I'm really good." "For real or just saying?" "For real." Another pause. She could hear Rochelle deciding whether to believe her, applying the particular sister-cousin calibration of 28 years of knowing each other's voices. Then, "Okay, I believe you." "Thank you. You know what I think." "What?" "I think you needed to go back so you could stop going back." Camille stopped walking. She was in the parking deck, level 3, the smell of concrete and exhaust around her. She stood with that sentence for a second. "Yeah," she said, "I think that's exactly what it was." She drove home with the windows down. Her apartment was as she had left it, coffee maker on the counter, books on the desk, the oak tree in the courtyard going gold and red at the edges, right on time. She unpacked, she made coffee. She sat at her desk and opened her email and read the response from the Whitmore Trust Search Committee, which was brief and professional, and asked if she was available for a preliminary conversation the following week. She replied yes. She looked out the window at the oak tree for a moment. It had been there since she moved in. She hadn't planted it, hadn't chosen it, had simply arrived and found it already there, already established, already doing its work. She had grown attached to it in the way you grow attached to things that are steadily, quietly present, the way you grow attached to anything that stays. She thought about what her mother had said. The room that's yours will always call you back, not to where you were, to where you should have been the whole time. She thought about the woman she had been in that kitchen in River Oaks at 2 in the morning, eating takeout at an island the size of a small apartment, surrounded by someone else's taste and someone else's art and someone else's idea of what a life should look like. She thought about the woman who had stood at the entrance of a ballroom 48 hours ago and taken 4 seconds to read the room. She thought about how much distance those two women had traveled, and how none of that distance had happened accidentally, and how none of it would have happened if she had stayed. She thought about Dominic. Not with bitterness, she checked for bitterness and found none, which no longer surprised her. She thought about him with the specific, quiet sadness of someone who had loved a person genuinely and watched them choose themselves in the wrong way. She hoped he found the right way. She meant it. She had always meant it. She thought about Margaret, which she did less often with less feeling. Margaret was a woman who had built her whole life around protecting a thing she had earned, and somewhere along the way had confused protecting with controlling, and had caused a great deal of harm with that confusion and probably would not fully see it. Some things don't resolve. Some people don't arrive at the understanding. That was not Camille's problem to solve. She closed her email. She picked up her phone and texted Nadia, "Thank you for last night, for all of it." Nadia replied 40 seconds later, "Go work on your Whitmore deck." Camille laughed. It came out clean and easy, the laugh. The same laugh she had heard coming out of herself at the dinner table in River Oaks, and marveled at how it could sound so normal when everything underneath it was anything but, except now there was nothing underneath it. The laugh was just the laugh. She opened a new document on her laptop. She titled it Whitmore Trust, Vision and Approach. She put her fingers on the keys. She thought about what she believed, about what it meant to build something that held people up, about what the load-bearing parts were, about what failed first when the stress gets real, about the specific, granular work of meeting people where they were and moving with them toward where they could be. She had been doing this work for years. She had been doing it formally in organizations, with funding and teams. But she had also been doing it on herself, the slow, unglamorous, load-bearing work of building a life that could hold her weight, of finding out what she was made of when all the scaffolding came down. She knew what she was made of now. She started typing. Outside the window, the oak tree moved in the wind, those first fall leaves lifting and settling, holding on and letting go in the same motion. She didn't look up. She had work to do.